The Almighty be praised. This time we want to prepare ourselves for our class. I want to say Shabbat Shalom to each one of you who are with us here in the class, and also for those of you who are joining with us by live stream. We want to thank the Almighty for you, and we want to invite you to our school. For those of you who may be joining with us by live stream for the first time, if you desire to enroll in School of Messiah Bible Institute, you can go to our website at www.ncmmi.20m.com. You can click on the link called School of Messiah Bible Institute, and there you can find an enrollment application, and you can enroll in any of the courses that we have. Today, we are beginning a new course, and the name of the course is called the Hebrew Language. And so, for those of you who are joining with us by live stream, we definitely hope that you will find this particular course of interest and that you would enroll. Bless the Almighty. However, if you choose not to enroll, you can always view this class on our platforms that we have. We have Facebook, and also we have our YouTube channel, Voice of Messiah Ministries, where you can also view this particular class. So today I want to go over this particular course before we get into the lesson. This course is called the Hebrew Language, and we've taught Hebrew at other times. However, this particular course that we are teaching on the Hebrew language, we're going to provide the instruction just a little differently than we have done in the past. And that is just simply because I'm led to present it in a manner where we show both the ancient Hebrew lettering system along with the block script lettering system that is more commonly seen when teaching a course in Hebrew. I want to go over the purpose for this course that we are presenting for each of you who are taking this course, those of you who are in ministry positions in the congregation. The purpose, the primary aim of the course is to learn Hebrew in order to more accurately understand and interpret the scriptures. So the main goal for taking the course, learning Hebrew, is so that we may have a better ability to accurately interpret the scriptures and accurately understand the scriptures. That is the intent. For those who want to learn the Hebrew for the purposes of conversation, then you will need to spend time around those who speak Hebrew regularly. And that's not the purpose of this course, is to learn Hebrew for the purpose of speaking Hebrew conversationally. In this particular country that we're in, various communities have different languages, and even within many of the what we call Jewish communities, Hebrew is not always the language that is spoken in conversation. So the purpose of learning Hebrew language It's not for the purpose of conversation, as it is for the purpose of understanding the scriptures properly. And there's a reason why we say that, because the current, what's commonly called Hebrew, which is really modern Hebrew, is not the Hebrew of the ancient scriptures. So it's important that we make that distinction. Also, one of the aims of this course is to understand how to read Hebrew from the ancient and modern lettering systems, to understand the history of the language and also the changes that were encountered over time with the departure of the ancient Hebrew. Also, along with that, the development of Aramaic Hebrew and the development of modern Hebrew in the modern era. So, this, as we have presented, is the purpose and the aims for this course dealing with the Hebrew language. Now, I want to make a note of the resources that we will be using in this course. One of the resources that we will use in this course, and I did not put those resources here up on the screen, but I do have it written down. So for those of you who have pen and paper, you can write down the resources. So the resources that we're going to use, which you can find, this one that I'm going to mention, you can find on our website under the written word library, and most of you in the class are familiar with the written word library, where we have books on PDF files that you can download to your device or to your PC and be able to obtain for reading. The first resource is called Ancient Hebrew Lexicon. Ancient Hebrew Lexicon. And that particular resource is by Jeff A. Benner. It's called Ancient Hebrew Lexicon. We will be utilizing that resource more often than the other resource that I'm going to mention. But that's one, you don't have to purchase it. If you want to purchase it and have it as a hard copy or paperback, that's your choice. But we have the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon in our on our website under the written word library. For those of you who are joining with us on our Facebook or our YouTube channel, Voice of Messiah Ministry platforms, you can go to the website. The website is www.ncmmi.20m.com. You want to click on the link called the Written Word Library. On that link, you want to scroll down to the bottom, and we have what is called Ancient Hebrew Lexicon. And we have other Hebrew resources. So if you go and you look for the Hebrew resources, you'll find this resource called the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon. And you can obtain that resource. That's one of the resources we will be using. And we're going to use that in most instances, especially as we deal with the ancient Hebrew lettering system and things that pertain to it. The other resource that we have, and this is a secondary resource, is this book right here. It is called Biblical Hebrew Step by Step. And this resource is by Menahem Mansour. Menahem Mansour. This is a resource that you can use. This particular resource is primarily for learning Hebrew from the what I would call Hebrew Aramaic script or the block script. And this particular resource primarily delves into learning Hebrew from the rabbinic Jewish framework. And so we have this as well. So I just wanted to share the resources that we're going to be dealing with in the course. Now, we want to go into the lesson. Today's lesson is going to be origins and history. Before we begin, let us have a word of prayer. Avidu Mokeno, we do bless you and thank you for this opportunity to begin this new course regarding the Hebrew language. I pray for your guidance and direction. I pray for each of the Talmudim that they would have an open mind and open spirit, and that they would be receptive to truth and information and scholarship as it is presented. We ask that you would order this particular class setting in a manner that suits you. Let there be a receiving of information and truth, and also may there be edification. We will thank you, Abba, in the mighty name of Yeshua. Amen. All right. Does everyone have an outline? For those of you who do not have outlines, we do have outlines in the chair of the first row. You can obtain an outline. And if you do not, we do have the information here on screen. Can everybody see the information clearly on the screen? Mm-hmm. All right. Now, I want to make a notation. Yes.
How do I make this more clear?
That's about as best as it's going to get.
Okay. Yeah.
You can't make it clearer than that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Yeah.
Pardon.
The clarity of it is the way it is.
Yeah. Pardon me.
I want to make a notation in regards to the language of Hebrew, and I'm going to make this notation at the very beginning. And the notation is that in Rabbinic Judaism, it notes 4 main phases of the Hebrew language. And it primarily has to do with its development. And I'm careful to use the term its development because the Hebrew language did not need to develop. But I will say the phases of its use. And within Rabbinic Judaism, these 4 phases of the Hebrew language are called Biblical Hebrew or Classical Hebrew. This term is used primarily for the Hebrew that has been seen and used with respect to the scriptures. Then there is Rabbinical Hebrew. Rabbinical Hebrew is that Hebrew which I primarily would refer to as a Aramaic form of Hebrew that was used during the time of the 1st century BCE to roughly round about the 5th or 6th century CE. And then there is what is called medieval Hebrew. And medieval Hebrew is that Hebrew that was used during that period of time, what we would refer to as the Middle Ages, somewhere from the time of the 7th century up until roughly round about the 19th century. And then there's what is called modern Hebrew. So these are the 4 phases of Hebrew from the perspective within the framework of rabbinic Judaism. So now, in our presentation of the Hebrew language, whereas we will be looking at information that comes from some of the rabbinic Jewish sources, we do not depend solely upon rabbinic Jewish sources to provide the teaching on the Hebrew language. There are other sources in which we have to be able to do this. So as we're looking at the origins and history, origins of Hebrew, we want to first of all note that the first language of man was Hebrew. The first language of man was Hebrew. If the screen has problems, don't worry about it. It's been having some issues. The first language of the human family was not called Hebrew. However, the first language of the human family was the original language that Yah gave to Adam. When we look in the book of Bereshit or Genesis, we're told that after the flood, that the whole human family were all of one lip or of one language. They all spoke the same language. And an event occurred to change those particular things. How many of you are familiar with the event that occurred to change those things?
Amen.
It was the Tower of Babel. The Almighty decided that he would come down and confound their languages. Everybody remember that? Yeah. We all remember that particular instance. So in the 11th chapter of Genesis, of Bereshit, first verse, it says, "And all the earth was one lip." This is how it renders it in the Septuagint. That means they all spoke one language. "And there was one language to all." So this one language that the human family spoke, Yah, of course, was the one who gave that language to Adam. Now, when Yah confounded the languages or confused the languages, then there were now different languages that were spoken by the different sons of Noah and their descendants. Now, there was one particular family that was not affected by the confounding of the languages, because the confounding of the languages came upon all of those who were practicing idolatrous practices. The man by the name of Heber. How many of you heard of Heber? All right. Heber is noted in the table of the nations. Heber is one of the descendants of Shem. And Heber did not follow the practices of idolatry. So with Heber and his family, they did not encounter having their language change. They remained with the same language that the Almighty originally had given. And so with with Heber and his family, this particular line of Shem, because you know, Shem had many sons, but many of the sons of Shem went the way of idolatry. But the line which came from Shem, in which Eber was a part of, is that line that preserved an obedience to the commands of the Almighty. It is through that line that the original language or the original tongue that the Most High had given to the sons of men was preserved. So we see that in Heber's line, the language was preserved. Now, one of the things we need to note about this original language, when it was put in a written form, the language was a pictorial language. In other words, the letters are pictures. How many of you are familiar with how when you see a picture of something, whether it's a diagram of a person with their hands up, or whether it's a diagram of an ox head, or whether it's a diagram of what looks like waves of water. These are all pictures of things in the world. So when we look at the lettering system came about from pictures. We can call it pictograms, okay? That's where the lettering system came from, pictograms. And these pictograms is where the letters are developed and also the meanings of the letters are developed, okay? So the language, the original language of man was pictorial. It was a pictorial letter script. Now, in the ancient time, the language was not called Hebrew originally. It was just referred to as the language of man. But different people groups used this same lettering system. The Phoenicians used this lettering system, and some would refer to it as Phoenician. And the reason why some would refer to it as Phoenician is because the Phoenicians were world travelers. They were seafarers, and so they went all over the place. And when they went, they also left artifacts of the language where they went. The language is also regarded as the Canaanite language as well. That's another term that was used to refer to the language. If you look over in the book of Isaiah, chapter 19, verse 18, when it speaks regarding the language of the Israelites, it refers to it as the language of the land of Canaan. The language of the land of Canaan. So in the ancient time, the language that we would refer to as Hebrew, or to be more specific, ancient Hebrew, was a language that was used not only by Abraham and his descendants, but also peoples that were living in the land where Abraham was. So the language was called Phoenician, it was called Canaanite language, and the ancient Hebrew was also closely related to Moabite and Ugaritic. Now, when we consider the Moabite language, it's important for us to understand that the Moabite language has a strong connection with ancient Hebrew. And the reason being, for those who might not be familiar with the Moabite people, the Moabite people are descendants of Lot. How many of you remember Lot? Lot, who is the nephew of Abraham. Well, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's two daughters decided that they did not want the line of their father to diminish. So they decided to get impregnated by their father. Those two daughters had sons. One they called Ammon, the other they called Moab. So the Moabites are descendants of Lot. So if we are looking at the language of the Moabite people have the same language as Abraham. So when we look at the languages of these people in the region of Canaan, they were all speaking primarily the same language, even though the people might say, well, we speak Moabite or we speak Ugaritic, these people in the land of Canaan were speaking the same language. So when we talk about ancient Hebrew, we have to understand that in the region of Canaan itself, the peoples of that region all spoke the same language. Does everybody catch that? Okay? So it's important to understand that. So when we look at archaeological finds, and these archaeological finds are translated, and we see this Semitic Hebraic script, this ancient Semitic script, we should not be surprised that this script is the same script that was used by the ancient Israelites prior to the captivities. Okay? So that's important to be mindful of. This has to do with the origins and the development of Hebrew. Now, we want to move now to section 2. Ancient Hebrew preserved in the biblical texts of the Torah among the Israelite remnant of the northern kingdom. Now, prior to the first captivity of the Israelites, this ancient Hebrew language was written and spoken for a number of centuries, from the time of Abraham's coming into the land of Canaan, the descendants of Abraham going into Mitzrayim, Egypt, the place of bondage. And while they were there for the 215 years in bondage, once they were released, they still spoke the same language and went back to the land of Canaan, commonly called Canaan. While being in the land, they became a settled people, developed into a nation with shoftim or judges, and then with kings. And it was during the reign of the kings and their wickedness that the Most High decided that he would cause another nation to take the Israelites and make them captives. So what we find is that when the 10 tribes in the north were taken into captivity, there was a remnant that were left in the north. There was a remnant of Israelites that were left in the north. And the manner in which the Assyrians would do things when they would conquer a people, they would take the other peoples of nations that they had conquered, and they would transplant them into the land of this new people that they had conquered. So there was a people that the Assyrians transplanted into the northern kingdom of the land of Israel. And these transplanted nations, and the scriptures tell us the names of these particular nations and peoples that were transplanted. These people amalgamated with the remnant of Israelites that were in the northern kingdom. Now, when this took place, because these transplanted people were worshiping idols, they encountered the wrath of Elohim upon them. And the wrath of Elohim that came upon them was that lions were killing them. And so a request was made to the king of Assyria to send an Israelite Kohen to teach the people the laws of the Elohim of the land of Israel, so that the people would not encounter what they were encountering. So if we go and look in the book of 2 Kings, for those who do not have the Septuagint, you would go to 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 27. For those of you who use the Septuagint, you would go to 4 Kings chapter 17, verse 27. Same chapter. And in this particular chapter, it gives the details of what happened. And I want to read, I'm going to read from verse 26 through to verse 27 so that you can get a picture of what was going on here. And it says, "And they spoke to the king of the Assyrians, saying, The nations whom thou hast removed and substituted in the cities of Samaria know not the manner of the Elohim of the land. And he has sent the lions against them, and behold, they are slaying them, because they know not the manner of the Elohim of the land. And the king of the Assyrians commanded, saying, Bring some Israelites thence, or here, and let them go and dwell there. And they shall teach them the manner of the Elohim of the land. And they brought one of the priests whom they had removed from Samaria. And he settled in Bethel and taught them how they should fear Yahuwah." So what we see going on is that after the destruction and removal of the 10 tribes from the north, this transplanted people were there in the land, and they were there amalgamating with the remnant of the people. And the problem was they were not able to figure out what was going on. They're like, look, we got lions coming after us. We need to figure out why we have this problem. So we have a priest that is sent. The priest teaches them the Torah of the Almighty so that they might know how to fear Elohim. Now, I'm not going to read any of the other verses, but I do want to somewhat summarize the situation, because the people who were there now, they continued to worship their idols, but at the same time, they also obeyed the commandments of the Torah as well. And so by doing that, they were able to somehow not have to face the terrors that came upon them while living in the land. Well, these people now that amalgamated, they became what became known as the Samaritans. How many of you heard of the Samaritans? All right. So the Samaritans are Torah observant people. However, there are some perspectives that they have with reference to the location of where the temple should be. That's different. However, they developed into a people who kept the Torah. And the Samaritans have a biblical source that is written in the ancient Hebrew language. They are actually, I would probably say, the ones who contain the oldest surviving document of an ancient Hebrew text, or what we would call a Paleo-Hebrew text. They have it. And the reason why they have it is because the priest who came back to teach them still had the scrolls of the Torah. However, they only have the 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's all they have. And that's regarded today as the Samaritan Pentateuch. But that particular Torah scroll, or Samaritan Torah, has the ancient Hebrew preserved. They're the only ones that have it preserved. Now, in section 3, we want to note that ancient Hebrew ceased to be used among the Judean Israelites after Babylonian captivity. Now, we just said something about the 10 tribes in the north, them going into captivity, a remnant of them staying and amalgamating with the transplanted people, and the preservation of the ancient Hebrew language contained in the scriptures. Now, when the southern kingdom went into captivity, they went into captivity by the Babylonians. When they went into captivity by the Babylonians, the scriptures that they had were burned up. What was one of the I guess MO, I can't find another word to use, but the MO of nations that were conquering other nations is that when they go in, they would destroy their libraries. They would burn up their scriptures. They would burn up their history, so that they would treat the people as though they had been decimated. It was a way of saying, you will be a forgotten people. So they burn up everything. So the libraries that they had in Jerusalem were burned up. It's possible that there may have been scrolls of the Torah and the prophets that may have been kept. I don't know. There's debate by scholars as to whether or not there were some that did or did not have it. In some of the writings, it's believed that the Most High revealed all of those scriptures to Ezra. And Ezra and those who were with him wrote down all of the scriptures. That's one particular perspective. one of the things that we do know is that when the Judean Israelites went into Babylonian captivity, that they ceased from using the ancient Hebrew. And the reason why they ceased from using the ancient Hebrew, and this is using the language as conversation. Like how, say like we speak English, all right? And say if we were taken captive by China or something like that. Okay, we go to China, all right? And they tell us, no, you can't speak English here. You have to speak Chinese. So then it's like here you have the first generation speaking Chinese. We have sons and daughters. The sons and daughters are going to speak the language of the land that they live in. So what's natural for them is to now speak the language. If we were in China as captives, it would be Chinese. Now, the thing about the language of the Babylonians, which at that time, the language of the Babylonians had become Aramaic. That had become the common language. It used to be Akkadian in Babylon. But at the time of the captivity of the southern kingdom going into Babylon, it became Aramaic. Aramaic became the language of the Babylonians. And so now the Judean Israelites had to become accustomed to the language of the Babylonians. They had to become accustomed to the lettering script of the Babylonians. They had to become accustomed to the calendar of the Babylonians. Everything about the Babylonian culture was now imposed upon them. So when the Judean Israelites left from Babylonian captivity after 70 years, you have a new generation that's been born. They're accustomed to Aramaic. That is the language that they were speaking when they left. And I like to refer to it as a Aramaic Hebrew because you have this Aramaic and Hebrew mix. Now, Aramaic is very similar to ancient Hebrew, but it is not ancient Hebrew. The reason why we say that is because there are different words that are used in ancient Hebrew in comparison to Aramaic. I'll give you an example. How many of you are familiar with the word bar mitzvah? You're familiar with the word bar mitzvah, right? If you hear the word bar mitzvah, you'll think, oh, that's Jewish, that's Hebrew, right? And the word bar mitzvah means son of the commandment. That's what it means. Well, it's actually Aramaic. Because the word for son in the Hebrew is ben. That's the word for son in Hebrew. It's ben. It's not bar. Bar is the Aramaic word for son. Now that's one evidence of showing how the language that has commonly been called Hebrew is not ancient Hebrew. It's an Aramaic and Hebrew mixture. And the reason for that is because when the people went into Babylonian captivity, which is what happens with any people who go into captivity to another people, they will now have to embrace the culture of their captives. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So when they came out, they went back to the land, but now when they came back to the land of Israel, they did not know the ancient Hebrew. They did not have the ancient Hebrew lettering script as a part of their alphabet. The lettering script that they have is now a Babylonian Aramaic script. So when you look at the block, what is called the block script, and most who are in the class today have had exposure to both the ancient Hebrew letters and what we will refer to as the more modern Hebrew letters or block script letters. When one looks at the block script letters, one will say, oh, that's Hebrew. Well, that's actually Aramaic. That's what it is. The letters are Aramaic letters. They are not Hebrew letters. They are Aramaic letters, and they have put upon them Hebrew phonetics. But they're Aramaic letters. They're not ancient Hebrew letters. Okay? So does everybody understand what's happening here, or what has happened here with this particular history of the captivity? The captivity that occurred in the 6th century BCE impacted the southern kingdom tremendously. So it's important that we understand that. So here's where we have ancient Hebrew now not being the language that would continue among the Judean Israelites. Now it continued amongst those in northern Israel. You understand? So this is why in teaching this, I can't teach it from solely a rabbinic Jewish perspective, because it's broader than that. Rabbinic Judaism is centralized to those whose history comes from the southern kingdom. Everybody understand that? Okay? When we deal with the Hebrew language encompasses more than just those who were from the southern kingdom. Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. You also have people who were living down in Ethiopia that came from the northern kingdom, and they also took it down to the south. You got people that speak ancient Hebrew. There are small communities where they still actually use this ancient Hebrew script. Isolated communities. So it's important that we understand it. That's why I have to teach it from this angle. We have to understand that when we deal with the Hebrew language, we must look at the history and understand it from the broader perspective. Now, with the ancient Hebrew ceasing, with the southern kingdom going into captivity, we now have this Aramaic Hebrew mixture that now becomes more prominent. Okay, this becomes now the more prominent language. The block script that now has been dubbed Hebrew, which is actually Aramaic, now has become more prominent. Okay? But in order for us to understand and appreciate the significance and importance of the Hebrew language from its origins, we have to look at these developments. It's important that we see it. Okay? Now, we want to look at Yahuwah declaring to restore the ancient Hebrew language. Now, Zephaniah the prophet utters that Yahuwah's declaration of the ancient language of Hebrew would be restored in the restoration of Israel. So if you go and you look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, the Most High makes a statement in the 9th verse, and the context of the ninth verse is contained inside of a number of passages that speak prophetically to the restoration of the house of Israel in the latter times, where all people of the earth would submit to the Almighty. And in the 9th verse, the Almighty says that he would restore or return to the lineage of the people a pure language. or the original tongue of the people, referring to the original tongue of man, what we refer to as ancient Hebrew. And the purpose of the language being restored is for all people to have the ability to call upon the name of Yahuwah properly. That was the purpose. He said, I'm going to restore the language so that they all may call the name of Yahuwah with one accord. Now, this is the intention of Yahuwah for restoring the language back. Now, when Zephaniah was prophesying, the captivities had not occurred yet. Did everyone hear that? When Zephaniah was prophesying, the captivities had not occurred yet. So what that tells us is that the Almighty knew that there would be a getting away from the original tongue among his people, that things would happen where they would be exposed to other languages. And so he says, I'm going to return the pure tongue. So as it pertains to the intention of the Almighty's intentions were that there be a restoration of the original Hebrew language. Everybody see that? See, when the Almighty is talking about restoring the language, he's not talking about restoring a Hebrew-Aramaic mix, because there was no Hebrew-Aramaic mix when Zephaniah was prophesying. Does this make sense to everybody? Now, I'm reiterating this because I want us to understand the intentions of the Almighty from his vantage point as to how he is looking at things when it comes to bringing about restoration. See, we have something going on in history where language is being mixed. The Hebrew language is being mixed with other languages, and then over a period of centuries, it's now accepted as, oh, this is Hebrew. Because you know how it is when you have a number of generations that are accustomed to a particular language, and they say, oh, well, this is Hebrew. No, it's a Hebrew mix, but it is not the ancient Hebrew. And it is not the language that the Almighty gave to the people of the earth. It's not. So it's important that we understand that. So all of the different languages, such as we noted that in Rabbinic Judaism that they have declared that there are four main stages of the Hebrew language. Classical Hebrew, which is biblical Hebrew, rabbinical Hebrew, medieval Hebrew, and modern Hebrew. So rabbinical Hebrew, medieval Hebrew, and modern Hebrew are not going to be restored. These are the phases of Hebrew that were used from the first century moving forward. Rabbinic Hebrew, that began during the first century CE. Medieval Hebrew, that began roughly around about the 6th or 7th century CE, up to the time of modern Hebrew. Now, modern Hebrew, it actually came into existence in the 20th century. That's a recent development. Modern Hebrew was developed for the purpose of those who live in the, or it was developed before the development of the state of Israel, but there was already things in the works through Zionism for the primarily the Ashkenazi Jewish people, those who were Eastern European Jews who wanted to have a homeland for themselves. So the concept of wanting to have a homeland for themselves, that developed right around about the turn of the century, from the 19th century going into the 20th century. So with that passion and desire, there also came with it the need to establish a language for the people. And so with that, you had the development of modern Hebrew. Okay? So modern Hebrew is a rather recent thing. It's not old. It's a recent thing. It's about 100 something years old. All right? So these are the various phases from a rabbinic Jewish perspective. Now, as we've already looked at what Yah has declared concerning restoring the ancient Hebrew language, it should help us to now see the significance and the importance of learning something about ancient Hebrew. The reason why it's important that we learn something about ancient Hebrew is because this is the language that the oldest biblical source that I believe, the Samaritan Pentateuch, is contained in. And so we need to know something about it. We need to know what the lettering system looks like. We need to know the meaning of the letters. And as we get into that, we will then find out how that when we see these letters, which are pictures, they will tell you the meanings of the words. And of course, we're going to get into that in another lesson. Now, we want to look at point number 5. Point number 5 has to do with Aramaic Hebrew used by Judean Israelites after Babylonian captivity. So we're going to rehash some things here. We want to note that the Aramaic Hebrew that's used by Judean Israelites after Babylon captivity, we see that evidence with Ezra in his writings. How many are familiar with Ezra? Ezra, the one who wrote the book of Chronicles. Ezra, the one who wrote his own book, Ezra. When Ezra wrote these books, we have evidences in his writings of an Aramaic style being used. And that's simply because Ezra, when he came out of Babylonian captivity, he spoke and wrote in Aramaic form of Hebrew. That only makes sense. That's why it's there. Okay, so we trail the history by that. Also, we see a witness in the Aramaic Targum translations of the 1st and 2nd century. In the 1st and 2nd century, what we would call the Bibles of the 1st and 2nd century, they were the Aramaic Targum. A Targum is just a term which means translation. And there were Aramaic Targums that were used for regular biblical reading by the majority of those who were a part of the Judean Israelite community. And like, for example, still to this day, Judean Israelites in Yemen, they still read these Targums. And they value the Targums more than they do the Masoretic text that was a later development. Okay? Now, the Targums that were used and that were regarded highly were the Aramaic Targums. The reason why is because this became the primary language that the people were accustomed to. There was a large Judean Israelite community in Babylon. Very large. And what's the primary language? What was the primary language? Aramaic. So we see a witness of the Hebrew Aramaic in the Judean Israelites after Babylonian captivity, witnessed in the Aramaic Targums of the 1st and 2nd century. We also see it used in the writings of the Shaliachim, the apostles. In the writings of the apostles, when they wrote, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, Yochanan, all of those books were first written in an Aramaic Hebrew form. That's what they were written in. So we have evidence of that as well. But they, in their time, referred to the language as Hebrew, even though it was actually a Aramaic Hebrew mix. And many scholars, when they talk about the language of the Judean Israelites of the 1st century, and these primarily are your non-Hebrew scholars, they'll say that they spoke Aramaic. That's what they'll say. They'll just say Aramaic. I like to use the phrase Aramaic Hebrew because I know that there was a Aramaic and Hebrew mix. It's basically what it was. Sort of like, I guess the best way to put it would be like how, you know how someone from Mexico may come here to, may come to California and may come up to Washington or wherever. And when they're speaking, they have their Spanish that they speak, and then they speak English also. They'll say Spanglish. You know what I mean? Because they mix both languages because they're dealing with their parents who still have a connection to the culture via the language, while they're also speaking English because of the culture of the land that they're in. So from being in Babylon, that whole Hebrew, Aramaic mix got all meshed together. Okay? And that's something that's very common. You know, if you were to look into the Eastern European Judeans, in particular those who are in or who were in Germany or Poland, they spoke a language that they call Yiddish. You know what Yiddish is? It's a mixture of the German together with the Hebrew. That's what it is. It's a mixture. You got that? So you don't say it's Hebrew. No, it's not. It's a mixture. Okay? So the Aramaic Hebrew was a mixture. But the thing about Aramaic was somewhat like a sister language. It was a Semitic language. There were a lot of commonalities, but some of the words are different. Okay? Like, for example, if you were to say the word Lord, as we say Lord, in Aramaic it would be Mari or Maria. Whereas in the Hebrew it is Adon. Got that? They're different words. But when you see it in the block script, you'll look at it and say, oh, this is Hebrew. No, it's Aramaic. That's the original language of the block script, Aramaic. Okay? So we see this still being used. Also, even in the writings of the Pharisaic rabbinic writings of the Mishnah came along around about the 3rd century CE. Okay? The Mishnah was developed around the 3rd century CE, and the Talmud was developed from around about the 3rd century CE to the 6th century CE. In those writings, very important writings to rabbinic Judaism, they are contained in the Hebrew Aramaic. And they were primarily referred to it mostly as Aramaic. Give you an example. You look in the Talmud, there was a verse that was quoted in the Psalms, and this verse that was quoted in the Psalms, it refers to the Torah of the Almighty. But the word Torah is not spelled Torah in Hebrew. The word used there is a word called nemosa. That's the word that's used there in the Aramaic. You might say, well, why isn't the word Torah used there? Because during that time, when they had this Aramaic Hebrew language that they were using, there were words that they borrowed from other cultures. One of the words that they borrowed and they continue to use, even in the rabbinic writings, was called nemosa. Now, nemosa comes from the Greek word nomos. I don't know if you're familiar with the word nomos. That's translated as law. There was a time in the history of the Judean Israelites where they had serious exposure to the Greeks. How many of you all remember 2nd century BCE, Antiochus Epiphanes wanting to have his whole region to be Hellenized? And Jason, who became high priest, said, yeah, we're good. We want to be citizens of Greece. So there was this Hebrew and Greek interaction. And anytime you have two peoples that are amalgamating, you're going to borrow words from them. Well, one of those words that became a part of the language was the Greek word nomos, but when they got it in the Aramaic Hebrew, they spelled it as nemosa. That's found in the Talmud in quoting one of the verses of the Psalms. So what I'm trying to share with us is that the ancient Hebrew language did not continue among the Judean Israelite community after Babylonian captivity. And after Hamashiach came, it still did not continue. There was still this Hebrew Aramaic language that had words that were borrowed from other cultures, because this is just the reality of what the language developed into. All right? Everybody see that? Any questions anyone has about this before I continue on? If I need to answer any questions. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to paint the picture to show that the ancient Hebrew language was not the language that the people were accustomed to using. I'm not saying that there was absolutely no relationship with Hebrew. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the ancient Hebrew language was not what was in effect. All right? So now let's look at modification in the Hebrew language by Rabbinic Judaism. There are some modifications in the Hebrew language by Rabbinic Judaism. One of these modifications was the introduction of the V sound with the Vav. How many of you have heard of the Vav? The Vav. You've heard of the Vav, right? Well, from the time of 190 CE, the late 2nd century CE. After that, there was an introduction of the Vav, or what I would like to say, the V sound into the Hebrew Aramaic language. The V sound was never a part of Hebrew. It was not a part of ancient Hebrew. But as a result, there again, being exposed to other cultures and what was happening in other languages, the V sound was being introduced into other cultures, into Greek culture, into the culture of the peoples that were living north north of the Greeks, the Germanic peoples. This also affected the rabbinic Judeans or rabbinic Jews as well. And so after 190 CE, which was the following of what is called the Mishnaic Age, there was the introduction of the V sound, where the Wav now had another dimension to it. They now said, well, it can be called the Wav or the Vav. So this is something that was introduced. It was a modification. So anytime you look at words in Hebrew and you see the Va in it, that's something that came along round about the 3rd century CE. Modification. Then also there was the introduction of the Nikudot. Nikudot, these are vowel designations in the development of the Masoretic text. So round about the 6th century CE to around about the 10th century CE, somewhere around about that time frame, there was the need to develop a authorized Hebrew source, because there wasn't an authorized Hebrew source at that time. So the Masoretes took upon themselves to develop that source. And in the process of developing that source, knowing that the Hebrew Aramaic language during this time, it was more or less, referred to as the rabbinical Hebrew. They wanted to preserve the phonetics of their cultural language. They wanted to preserve the phonetics. So in order to preserve the phonetics, they decided to introduce a vowel designation system. That's what I call it. The vowel designation system was called the Nikudot. This is where you have a series of dots in different places, dashes, crosses. You have different designations that are put in certain spots of the word to tell you this is how you pronounce the vowel in this word. That's something that was also introduced. So what we discover is that with the language, from one generation to the next, depending upon what the need was that had come about, we see modifications coming into play. And then also lastly is the development of modern Hebrew in the 20th century. And modern Hebrew, as I mentioned a little earlier, the primary purpose was to develop a language that would be central for those who were, at that particular time, they primarily were Eastern European Jews, Germany, Poland, those areas, southern Russia, that wanted to have a homeland for themselves. And in wanting to have a homeland for themselves, because before they went to the land of Israel, they were thinking about going into one of the countries in Africa. That was one of the other things that had been discussed. But the language of modern Hebrew was developed for the purpose of providing a language for the people that wanted to have a homeland, all right? And modern Hebrew is a little different. So I wanted to share this regarding the history and regarding the origins of the Hebrew language, so that we can understand what things we need to focus on as it pertains to understanding the scriptures accurately. All right? Any questions? All right, no questions? All right, then we will close. Father Yahuwah, we do bless you and we do thank you for the opportunity to provide the information regarding the origin and history of the Hebrew language and how it has evolved within the different communities of those who are connected to the house of Israel. I pray, Abba Yah, that this information has provided edification and also enlightenment to each of the students, and that they would take this information and utilize it as they understand the importance of the Hebrew language, in particular the ancient Hebrew, and its value in knowing and understanding the scriptures more accurately. We do thank you, Abba Yah, for all things. May your great name be praised and glorified in the mighty name of Yeshua. Amen. For those of you who have joined us by live stream, we do thank you for your participation. We trust that this teaching has been helpful to you and that it has informed you on the origins and history of the Hebrew language. And also, we trust that you are able to discover the intention of the Almighty and what he desires with reference to the restoration of the ancient language. Well, the Most High be praised. We invite you to join us in our midweek time of teaching, which is on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. and also in our Shabbat gathering on next Shabbat, Saturday at 12:30 p.m. Well, the Most High bless you and your families. Shalom.
Shalom.